Right, so we've got a little play on words here. UKReative, a suggestion on economic perspectives. This is all about economic perspectives. Over the course of the last 48 hours, here at the Palace and around the fringes of the Palace, there has been so much discussion of Ukraine and Europe. Of course, important decisions loom, and important signatures may be in the offing for a new era in the relationship between Ukraine and the European Union. But let us think about different perspectives. Is this truly in the best interests of Ukraine, the best interests of the European Union, and the best interests of the region within which Ukraine sits? Well, these are all different perspectives, and they will be represented in our panel discussion today. So let me introduce to you the members of our panel. We have Pascal Lamy, who is, of course, associated with the World Trade Organization. He led that body for many years, perhaps many more years than he cares to remember. He had to endure several interviews with me when I would constantly say, okay, when are we going to get this World Trade Agreement? And he would always say, Stephen, I'm not going to pin myself down to a date, but I can guarantee you it will happen. Well, we are still waiting, and you are no longer there, but let's gloss over that. Let me also introduce to you, with an international perspective on all of this, Professor Nouriel Roubini, who, as many of you will know, is known to some in financial markets as Dr. Doom, because he, perhaps more than any other commentator on markets and financial affairs, saw at least a good deal of the catastrophe that was looming in the period before 07, 08, and warned about it, but maybe some of us didn't listen. Let me also welcome at this point Sergey Glazyev, who, again, many of you will know, is an advisor to the President of the Russian Federation, and as such is very welcome at this summit with his own particular and important perspective. And let me also introduce you to Petro Poroshenko, Member of Parliament here in Ukraine and Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Minister, it is a pleasure to have you on this panel. The format here is going to be that Pascal Lamy is going to give us his thoughts, his overview at the lectern first, and then we're going to hear from all of our other contributors who are going to remain in their chairs, actually, because it's easier that way. But Pascal's going to go to the lectern, and the stage is yours right now, Pascal.
Well, thanks, and thanks a lot for invitation to this session. I will try and answer the question of what's the right international trade strategy for Ukraine, and I will do that from a purely economic and trade perspective. I'm not here as a politician, I'm here as an expert. Now, in order to answer properly this question, which by the way has been researched by a few good academics who've worked in advance of this session and which have produced a paper which I understand the Foundation will publish very soon. Let's start with the name of the game, which is that experience of high growth countries shows that the proper strategy today is to integrate into world markets. This is not a theoretical point of view, this is not a philosophical point of view, this is just what numbers say if you look at numbers. Now, the core of such a strategy is now about integrating in global international supply chains, which is the new pattern of international trade. Many of you will have an old pattern in mind where one country was trading with another country. One country was producing something which another country was consuming, whether goods or services. Now, this is the old world. It does not exist anymore. we now are in a world of trade where producing goods and services is along a supply chain that crosses border many times. And this is the fundamental reality which all countries who want to use international trade to grow have to cope with today. Which means that low trade costs are even more critical than in the past. What matters is not so much tariffs, what matters is trade facilitation, border administration, regulatory discrepancies, standards, norms, which, by the way, is probably one of the reasons why the Prime Minister this morning insisted so much on this standard matching capacity. This strategy calls for adopting standards that match international best practices, whether it's on food safety, data protection, whether it's on car emissions, whether it's on the size of car bumpers, or whether it's on the size of banking or insurance regulation. Now, that's the context. Coming back to the essential question of this afternoon, in this context, which is very important, what is the proper option for Ukraine? Ukraine has to choose, basically, between two models. The first one is the one which EU countries or members of the Eurasian community have chosen to follow. It's a system where you transfer the trade sovereignty of your country to a supranational body, whether the European Commission on one side or whether the Eurasian Commission on the other side. It's a model which Germany, France, Kazakhstan, Russia, just to give these two examples, have chosen to follow. Then there is another option, another model, which is the one Mexico, Korea, Norway, Switzerland, Canada have chosen, which is you keep the sovereignty on your trade policy and you adjust in a sort of variable geometry of trade agreements all over the place. Which of these two options is the right one for Ukraine is, of course, for Ukraine to decide. My own advice, for what it's worth, is that the second option seems to me to be better for this country, and basically for three reasons. First, Ukraine has a specific mix of economic endowments that is different from EU or Eurasian countries. Ukraine has plenty of land, has a relatively low cost, relatively skilled labor, has lots of mineral resources. Second reason is that half of Ukraine trade is with EU or the Eurasian Customs Union, and that the structure of the imports and exports with both sides is and should probably remain both very different and very complementary. And third, given the growing importance of what the Prime Minister mentioned this morning and which I also mentioned, which is addressing non-tariff obstacle to trade in the future, I think Ukraine is well placed to leverage its in-between position between the European Union and the Eurasian Customs Union with different regulatory standards for the moment, but which, in my view, I may be wrong, but that's my view for the future, will at some stage converge. My basic option is that Eurasian system and EU system will have to converge in the future, probably under the umbrella of some sort of a framework agreement, which would, the purpose of which would be to provide for the convergence of these regulatory systems, including, for instance, in areas of major importance for Ukraine, like energy trade. So, in other words, and I'll stop there, Ukraine should, for the time being at least, probably emulate the example of Mexico, who has a free trade agreement with North America, with US, with Canada, on the one side, but on the other side has a free trade agreement with EU, also, by the way, has a free trade agreement with a number of Latin American countries on the western coast of Latin America, and now is building an important network of free trade agreements with Asian countries. So, for the moment, and for the reasons I've given, this seems to me to be the proper option. Final point, and I think we'll have to come back in the discussion, whichever trade opening strategy Ukraine will choose, what matters at the end of the day is the domestic capacity to adjust the economy to new competitive pressures. If the name of the game is trade openness, if the name of the game is tackling what obstacles to trade of today are and not those of yesterday, then the main issue in political terms will be, does Ukraine have the capacity to increase competition in its own economy through the pressure of external competitive pressure? And this, of course, remains in some ways a question mark, as always in international issues, and that's also true for trade. Coherence starts at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Pascal. So there we have the Pascal Lamy prescription, what he feels would be in the best interests of Ukraine's economic development in terms of, certainly in terms of trade policy. Nouriel, and I invite you to sit down. I don't think we need to go to the lectern, but I do want you to engage now, perhaps with what Pascal has said, his prescription, but also your view as to what the choices facing Ukraine right now really are and where you feel Ukraine needs to go.
Yes, unlike Pascal, I'm not an expert of international trade, even if in the past I was teaching it. I'm more of a global macroeconomist. So in thinking about these trade choices, I start with the macroeconomic condition of a country, the external environment in terms of trade, the institutions and so on, and then make an assessment of what are the right economic choices on going one direction or another on a trade agreement. As everybody knows here, the macroeconomic condition of this country are fragile. A large current account deficit, an overvalued currency with fixed exchange rates, falling now reserves as there is capital flight and money is getting out as interest rates around the world are rising, gross external financing needs that may not be able to finance, and maybe the need to go to an IMF program to avoid a currency crisis. There's also a fiscal deficit with a rising stock of public debt, tax distortion and evasion, and high and expensive energy subsidies. So from a macro point of view, twin deficit of this sort eventually can lead to a sudden stop to a currency crisis, even to a debt crisis. The external environment of the country is also fragile. The cost of many things that are being imported is still high, like oil, gas, and energy, and for lots of reasons, including geopolitical ones, these things are going to remain high. And then you have to use very expensive subsidies to make sure that the consumers have a low cost of energy. And the price of many of the exports of the country over the last few years have fallen. Price of steel, price of agricultural goods. And with the end of the commodity super cycle, probably this trend is going to continue. So there'll be pressures on the current account through the terms of trade of the country. And in terms of the institutional and structural environment of the country, as we know, there are difficulties. There are many structural reforms that have not been done. There is a weak business environment. The cost of doing business is high. Labor market rigidities, many monopolies or oligopolies that are rent-seeking, lack of competition. And in the institutional political side, there are problems of governance, of corruption, even of monopolization of power, of government effectiveness. And the result of all this is that actually if you're looking at productivity level in this country, you compare them to those of other countries that are in Eastern Europe who might want to join the EU, not only there is a divergence, much lower, but in the last 10 years, the divergence has increased. In 2001, the per capita output of a typical Ukrainian worker was 23% of the EU 15. 10 years later, it was only 19%. So the divergence coming from the distortion has continued over time. So you have macroeconomic challenges, you have external environmental challenges, and then lack of structural reform and lack of institutional reforms as well. So what it implies for the choice of in which direction to go. I think that Pascal was correctly saying you don't have to choose one or the other because you know, there is a third model of forming free trade agreements with many different countries. But I would say if you take the logical consequences of what is said, if you lock yourself in a custom union with the Eurasian group, you're not going to have an option of doing free trade agreements with many other parts of the world. While if you do decide to go in the direction of the association agreement and the free trade agreement with the EU, the option of having then free trade agreements with many other parts of the world is going to be an option that is available. Secondly, let's be realistic. If you join essentially an agreement with the EU, a free trade area, it's not just the free trade areas of goods and services. Eventually, as was pointed out, is harmonization of regulation. Eventually, is becoming member of the European Union. Eventually, maybe even becoming member of the Eurozone. So from a trade union, you go to an economic union, you go to a monetary union, then you have a banking, fiscal, and then eventually political union. And even in the case of the custom union, in the Eurasian side, is not just a free trade arrangement. Eventually, there is a program of going in the direction of a stronger economic union, of having a common currency, and eventually even a political union of one sort or another. So making one choice or another is a material choice. Now, the constraints that this country has been facing is that on one side, some political forces wanted to maintain the monopoly of power. That implies not doing the institutional reform and go in the direction of democracy and opening up even the political system and dealing with corruption. And there are very strong also economic power, oligopolies of one side or another, that will be disadvantaged by having more competition, and joining the EU would imply more competition, but also more productivity, more efficiency. So choosing the Eurasian nation means maintaining a political system that is not competitive, and maintaining an economic system that is not competitive, that in the long run implies that this divergence of per capita income that's gotten worse in the last decade, rather than becoming better, is going to become even worse, as opposed to an option that implies that you need to have institutional reforms, political reforms, economic reforms, competition, moving away from rent-seeking, moving away from oligopolies, and integrating yourself more in the global economy. Given what I said, it's clear those are the options that the country have of going one direction that implies eventually higher growth, high per capita income, higher welfare, or going in a direction that's going to make the economic system that is already fragile more fragile than before.
Well, Nouriel, that's not really much of a choice, is it, if you put it that way?
Well, there is a choice.
Yeah, but you're saying there's a choice sort of between sticking your head in the gas oven and enjoying a new life somewhere else. It's not much of a choice, unless you particularly like gas ovens. Anyway, let me, without further ado, perhaps get a different perspective from Sergey Glazyev, who, Sergey, you've been listening to this conversation so far. You may feel that the customs union has been somewhat mischaracterized. I don't know, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you tell us what is your view of the choice that faces Ukraine, and perhaps tell us if you are concerned that you feel Ukraine might make the wrong choice. But anyway, you tell us what you think.
Спасибо. Предыдущий выступающий воспроизвел.
The previous speaker reproduced the traditional set of myths that are pervasive in the Ukrainian media and that are very dubitable in terms of their realistic nature. The customs union of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus do not go beyond the classical definition of a customs union. It is not a political formation. Unlike the European Union, it embraces only certain limited number of functions that are delegated to the supranational level. That is customs regulation, trade policy, that is trade and customs tariffs, sanitary and phytosanitary control, public procurement, technical regulation. And then we speak about a common policy in pricing in monopolistic sectors. Frankly speaking, we've been in the freight trade area with Ukraine for quite a while. Recently, I signed a bilateral agreement between Russia and Ukraine on free trade area, and it is a model for forming FTAs throughout CIS countries. But there are different types of FTAs. Today, the Prime Minister of Ukraine asked you why we are not concerned over Ukraine's signing FTA with the East and is going to sign that agreement with Turkey, but are worried about FTA with the EU. It's not a common FTA. It is an FTA that is characterized by non-equality. On the one hand, Ukraine undertakes to apply all EU directives in all those functions that I mentioned, that is trade and customs regulation, technical regulation, sanitary and veterinary control, public procurement, etc. Unlike the EU, where decisions are based on consensus and every nation has a veto, our agreement that, or the agreement that Ukraine is going to sign with the EU, the FTA, agreement, Ukraine will have to fulfill or to implement EU directives without having a say, and it has to make consistent all of its regulations with those of the EU, and it undertakes not to change its own regulation unless it is approved by the EU. So technically, in these areas, Ukraine loses its capacity of decision-making. We see it as a non-equality situation. This agreement is not mutually beneficial because Ukrainian production will still be quoted for a certain period of time. Quotas will remain for a certain period of time upon signing of the agreement. And what bothers us is that international commitments of Ukraine are ignored as to its relations with Russia, with other CIS countries, and WTO regulations and norms are not observed. Availing myself of the opportunity of speaking before Pascal Lamy, there is Article 24, whereby the state establishing an FTA or other regional organizations should inform other countries without delay and go into consultations with them. The same pertains to FTAs within CIS. So unilaterally you impose certain decisions on Ukraine that would not bring any benefits to Ukraine, but for the myths about which were spoken. Ms. Clinton said that Ukraine has an asset of chocolates and shale gas. I understand that good chocolate is Mr. Poroshenko's personal achievement, but if anybody will try to find cocoa beans in Ukraine, he or she would fail. There's no cocoa beans in Ukraine. As for the shale gas, yesterday I was in Lugansk, and citizens there are shocked with the prospects of producing shale gas there. It's a huge urban agglomeration. There are about 12 million residents there. It's the same to producing shale gas somewhere between Frankfurt and Cologne. Would it be fair to ask citizens of those areas to hazardous works that would spoil water supplies to the areas with very dubious benefits, uncertain benefits? As far as we understand that, competitive edge of Ukraine is high technologies, new technological model and pattern. Traditionally, Ukraine has been a center for machine building, aviation, nuclear industries. It is with these industries and sectors that we tie Ukraine's future. As the previous speaker said, Ukraine has a very serious trade balance deficit, and if we want to stabilize Ukrainian economy, then participation in the customs union with Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan enables it to remove a trade deficit with the reduced gas prices, the cancellation of duties, oil duties, and it is what Ukraine lacks today to balance its payment balance. Is Europe ready to bridge this gap and to compensate for the lost opportunities if it just forgoes customs union? What I mean when we speak about trade, Mr. Azarov spoke about re-import. Re-import is a matter for the quality of customs services, but the prospects of squeezing Ukrainian goods off the Russian markets mean that Ukrainian manufacturers won't be able to accommodate European standards within 2 years. And if the Ukrainian market is closed, then the countries of the customs union are the only way out. And the cancellation of sanitary and veterinary control on the border will establish some epidemiological threats and epizootic threats that will require more strict controls on the borders. That's what Vladimir Putin, Russian president, spoke about 2 days ago, meaning that if we are concerned that fluctuations in trade are so dramatic that they will affect our manufacturers, then according to the WTO norms, we will have to introduce protective measures. And as Ukraine revises its trade tariffs with the EU, we will be doing the same thing in our country. That will mean the expansion of the deficit of trade balance in Ukraine, and the import to Ukraine will grow by $2 to $3 billion. And if such measures are introduced by the EU, then there would be loss on export up to $4 billion. As a result, the trade balance deficit would grow to 12-13 billion. Who will be balancing that? We now, to equalize the trade balance of Ukraine, we allowed our commercial bank to lend huge commercial loans to Ukraine. We understand that Ukraine is in a dire economic position, and according to our estimates, to balance this situation, we need $15 billion, or Ukraine needs $15 billion to improve its trade balance. That's what cooperation with us promises Ukraine. If it signs the association agreement and the trade balance situation deteriorates, then the question will be who will be saving it, because currency reserves Ukraine will last only 6 months, and the overall cost to overcome a default in this case would amount to 25 or even 35 billion euros. Is Europe ready to undertake this burden of financial responsibility? Now what Europe is offering Ukraine is to embrace Ukraine in terms of regulations, of legislation, of prohibiting integration with Russia, and then it should bear the cost, which comes up to $35 billion. So I think that it is time to forgo mythologies and start thinking realistically. And I will here agree with Pascal Lamy. We are not against the FTA. President Putin has spoken about that many times, including the free FTA from Lisbon to Vladivostok. But what we should think about, it's what Pascal calls establishing frameworks, the cooperation between two large conglomerates, European Union and Eurasian Union. Only then will we have the opportunity for good cooperation.
Mr. Glazyev, may I say you've made me have one little thought immediately. I introduced Nouriel Roubini as the man known as Dr. Doom, but in a sense on this panel you've just proved yourself to be another Dr. Doom. I don't mean that in a negative way. Well, I guess it is negative, but anyway, you have a perspective, and it is a very clear perspective, and you seem to be saying that, if I can summarize it in one well-known phrase, Ukraine should be very careful what it wishes for if it goes down this track. But I don't want to get into a Q&A right now. I want an immediate response, if I may, from Minister Poroshenko. You've just heard Mr. Glazyev lay out all of the reasons, very powerful reasons in his view, why it would be damaging to Ukraine, very damaging to the CIS states, to the customs union, and frankly, disastrous for Ukraine to pursue this association agreement. So let's hear your response.
First of all, I would my speech with the thanks to Viktor Pinchuk for the Yalta, for our meeting here, for the level of the guests and for the level of the discussion. That's really helpful, and I think this is exactly what Ukraine now needs. Open, fair, transparent discussion about future of the world and future of Ukraine and Ukrainian perspective. Some of the discussion is full of myths, which we should discuss here and find out in arguments what to do. Some of our real friends support Ukrainian producer. And yesterday we listened very strong signal from the State Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. And for me it was, please wait a second. For me it was most important thing, not the message which Hillary sent to the audience, because I have a long relation with the State Secretary. I was the not only Minister of Economy but Minister of Foreign Affairs who signed up with the State Secretary Clinton the inauguration ceremony for launching our Commission for Strategic Cooperation in Washington 2009. But the most important thing, Mr. Glazyev, was the reaction of the audience yesterday and full whole of the applause supporting the message from Mr. Clinton. And now please support it again. Because, thank you very much indeed, because this is not only reaction on the Russian chocolate or Ukrainian chocolate in general. This is reaction for the Ukrainian machine building industry, for the steps which you plan to undertake for the Ukrainian coal and mine sector, for Ukrainian foods industry sector, and any others. Because I can 100% confirm that nobody, neither in this hall, nor in the world, will strongly believe that Georgian mineral water, or Moldavian wine, or Ukrainian chocolate, or Lithuanian cheese, or Belarusian milk product and dairy products are really harmful for the health of the Russian consumer. This is simply not true. Which is the most important thing, that not only in the world nobody believes in that, in the Russia nobody believes in that. Could you give me an answer? Are you believing that? That Ukrainian products, any other products are harmful? Or this is the steps which is not adequate to the WTO, and Pascal will happily confirm that, for the trade limits and trade limitation. I think we will have a Q&A session. Please write down, because I have a lots of answer on your question, but we will have Q&A session. No. We are here on the democracy, and nobody here switch off the microphone, believe me.
No. In the interest of fairness, let me just say that, Mr. Glazyev, do not worry, there will be plenty of time to respond. So.
That's exactly what I want to add. Thank you very much indeed. Now, seriously speaking, our Ukrainian economy is a bad situation. Yes, that's true. We have yesterday downgraded our rating by Moody agency. Actually, we have two main reasons because of that. First reason, bad governance. Bad governance because of the corruption, because of the absence of the reform, because of the budget deficit, because of the absence of the discipline. And we need to undertake a strong efforts how to improve the situation and to renew our cooperation with the IMF, where we find out $15 billion, which you're so worried about. We have macro-financial support from the side of our partners of European Union, which is already signed, and they are just waiting. And when we renew our cooperation with the IMF, World Bank, EBRD, and any other things which we already signed, the program for cooperation for multi-billion-dollar perspective. And, of course, we have promises from the Eurasian Bank of Development with just $1.5 billion statutory fund for the whole Eurasian community and $4.5 billion a balance. And we know exactly, and we listen your figures, that Ukraine immediately received up to $20 billion support from the Russian side, immediately the very next year when we will be the member of the Customs Union. Sorry? 12. I write down 12, Mr. Glazyev will find out the way, is it 10 or 12, but it is no matter. Look, last week it was published the figures for the Russian economy. And GDP growth of Russian economy are lowering significantly for up to 1.5% and up to the zero growth in a certain quarter. And Russian economy undertake this decisive step to solve this question. They change the central bank governor. They launch the new program for QE. They devaluate the national currency up to 10% for rising up the competitiveness. They do a lot of other things, including they borrow from the world commercial market $7 billion just last week. If you so insisted to give Ukraine $12 billion a year, in Russia and Ukraine we have our common Soviet history, we have a film «Покровские ворота», where the main hero asking, ну тебе-то это зачем, если у вас самих денег не хватает? But what I want to stress, which is the most important thing, I hate the term trade war. The most important thing, I hate the term trade war between Russia and Ukraine. This is simply impossible. This is against WTO rules. And we can discuss is Pascal Lamy was successful or non-successful head of the WTO. But under his leadership, Ukraine became a member of WTO. And Russia became a member of WTO. And we take an obligation to fulfill all the norms of WTO. And because of that, this is trade war simply against the rule of WTO. That's it. And when we ask a certain myth about the shale gas, ecological harmful, this is our sovereign responsibility, and we guarantee the ecological security for our people. But we, at the same time, make our economy much more energy effective, because all your calculation can't take into account that Ukraine consumes 60 billion cubic meters of gas a year. But if you compare with any other countries, today we have 7.6 thousand barrels a day of oil equivalent for $1 billion GDP. United States consumes we have 7.6. United States have 1.3. Poland have 1.2. China have 1.8. Even Russia have 5. And Ukraine has almost 8. And we cannot be any more so energy inefficient. That's why only one subsequences. We do not need so much Russian gas. That's it. And that means that all your calculations need to be corrected and need to be discussed. And not to feed us with this type of things. I have another very interesting opinion poll, which can be also interesting for Mr. Glazyev, I hope. We have asking the Ukrainian audience, does it support traditionally custom union or European integration and association with Europe? Now, we have a significant change of the proportion, fortunately. Because first time in our history, more than 50% of the people support European integration. And first time in our history, less than 30% of our people support custom union. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Glazyev. But this is not an end, because we should understand who support European integration among these 50% and who support custom union integration in these 30%. That's very interesting statistic. 30% is the older people, less educated. 50% is a young generation, well educated. That means for the European integration is our future. And custom union, sorry about that, is our past. That's it. And we are happily present this opinion poll to you, and we are ready and open for the discussion. Where is the future and where is the past? But if I think that we can accept recommendation from Pascal Lamy about the way of the Norwegia, about the Switzerland, about the Canada, Korea, yes, why not? Because nobody now confirmed that we are receive invitation or we plan to be a full member of the European Union. We need to make a hard work for that. But until now, we have absolutely no danger, neither for Russia, nor for the custom union, nor for the European Union. Because what is my messages? I am not only a politician. I know something about the economy. I know something about business. And I can say if the economy of the state, any state, Russia, Poland, or Ukraine, want to be developed, the only one engine for that is the competitiveness. Open, fair, most probably without active interference of the state. Because state is all the time unprofessional and not supporting business at all. In that case, let Ukrainian producer be competitive with Russian producer on the Russian market. That's it. Don't put the barrier. The same way, like Ukraine do not put the barrier, and let Russian producer be competitive on our market. That stimulate investment, that stimulate new technologies, that stimulate loan, that stimulate rising up the quality and everything like that. And I was the person, when I was a Minister of Economy, I'm finishing, the last sentence. When I proposed to the Eurasian Economic Commission, because not to Russia, because Russia has no sovereign right to discuss this question anymore. But we proposed the text for our association agreement, which I signed, and I'm proud of that, to the Eurasian Economic Commission. It was 1.5 years ago. Please analyze, please, before we sign it, do you have any comments on that? We are ready and open for the discussion. Please, we signed up Eurasian Economic Commission and Minister of Economy memorandum for technical regulation. Do you really read this memorandum? Because it's based on our development on the common base with the European standard. Because believe me, in Europe, in Ukraine, And in Russia live the same people. They have the same standard for the food security. They have the same standard for phytosanitary security and demands. And if Russia has more than almost 49, almost 50% of his export to the European Union, and only 6% of the export to the customs union, my piece of advice to you, let's harmonize our standard and technical regulation on the base of the European Union standard. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Minister. Now, just one general observation. We started a little late, so we're going to have to, from now on, be incredibly disciplined in being fast and quick and concise in our contributions, because I want to get a few questions in from the audience. But just one from me, and I think, in fairness, I have to go back to you, Mr. Glazyev, because you've just heard the minister's powerful words there. And my thought is this: having heard the minister, my question to you is simply, what are you so frightened of? Pascal Lamy says that in the long run, the Eurasian economic bloc is going to have to accept the economic norms, the standards, the practices that are prevalent in the European Union. Well, okay, well, you can tell me I'm wrong in a minute. But anyway, I'm saying it, even if Pascal Lamy isn't, that is the direction of travel, frankly, because it seems inevitable that your trading bloc, your economic bloc, is going to have to modernize and reform. Ukraine is modernizing and reforming, and it wants to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Why does that lead you to be so fearful and to engage in what the minister has just accused you of, which is the practices of trade war?
Certainly, Mr. Poroshenko is used to listening to himself only, and myself as a person who calculated, together with Ukrainian colleagues, all the economic effects, I can say we're not afraid of anything. That's an issue for Ukraine, for those who are applauding to signing the association agreement. I would suggest those who applaud, please read the agreement and understand. If you are from Europe, is Europe ready to pay 35 billion euros for Ukraine avoiding default? That's your decision. You take the responsibility. We are just warning. And if Mr. Poroshenko's chocolates are produced according to European standards, that's great. The market of Europe is great. You will open it, I'm sure. Talk to sanitary service, and they will explain. As to technical regulations and standards, you mentioned memorandum, but you are, I want to ask you, have you read the association agreement between Ukraine and the EU that was drafted in Brussels? If you would draft it, there would be Russian and Ukrainian text. The text was published on the 30th of August for the first time in Ukraine. If you are so sure that most of the population of Ukraine support that decision, do the referendum. Why European Party prohibits people to get together and discuss the prospects for Ukraine to participate in customs union. That's democracy, European style. That's your domestic problem, but you want European standards. European Party prohibits in the court for people to get together and discuss the issues of integration. If you are so much sure that there is a support, why do you scare the members of the parliament who want to sign the petition to the Constitutional Court of Ukraine? Your sociological polls show that 40% of Ukrainian population still want to go to the customs union and Eurasian economic union. When the minority talk on behalf of everyone, that's not European style. Europe should pay a lot of money. I mentioned the amount which is needed to balance the deficit of Ukraine if the agreement is signed, and this is a huge money. And Europe probably also has to understand that there is the constitution. If there are doubts that the agreement corresponds to Ukrainian constitution, what do they prohibit the members of parliament to go to the constitutional court? Mr. Poroshenko drafted the agreement as a member of parliament. Probably he could have signed this petition to constitutional court. In Kazakhstan, when some people doubted that the agreement was against the constitution, then the prosecutor sent a petition to the Constitutional Assembly of Kazakhstan. Talking about calculations, the calculations are made in the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. Mr. Poroshenko even mixed up all the figures. The calculations show that until 2020, there will be no positive effect in trade of Ukraine when it signs the agreement, association agreement with the EU. That's recognized by Ukrainian experts and international experts. Only after 2020, the positive effect is possible only if European investors come. Now only Russia buys the bonds. Russian investors contribute more than half of the direct investments to the economy of Ukraine. And to say that all the producers want to sell their products to European Union, that's a myth, because European Union doesn't accept Ukrainian goods. 70% of Ukrainian export, of food export, goes to us. All the machine building export goes to us. If you believe you can offer better terms for energy resources, when Ukraine joined the energy community, it got just problems. Europe is ready to compensate the problems of Ukraine, which Ukraine has because the legislation of Europe and Ukraine do not match.
Thank you very much indeed. I suspect, you know what, Minister, if you don't mind, I suspect we could have this back and forth over figures and different sort of calculations as to the immediate effect of signing the agreement and what it would do to trade to your east. We could continue with what you're both calling the myths of the other for the duration of this session, but I don't want to do that. I want to very brief. I know Pascal, Lamy, having heard, you know, the very adamant positions from the two of you, Pascal Lamy wants to say something briefly, and it hopefully will be brief, Pascal. And then there are people with their arms dropping off. They're so keen to get into this debate, so I'm going to open it up. So very briefly, Pascal, and then we'll go to questions.
I'm always brief, sometimes too brief. What I would like to do at this stage is try and de-dramatize this discussion, which I think is a bit too much of a hype. Sergey is perfectly right, WTO-wise, and I'm not speaking anymore for WTO, I'm just a former trade expert. All this will have to be notified to WTO, like EU, Korea, like Russia, Switzerland, like US, Colombia. So not a problem. Now, where I'm a bit worried by this discussion is as if the name of the game was regulatory competition between EU and the Eurasian Customs Union, both sides taking Ukraine hostage. Now, I think that's the wrong view. I think if EU intends to take Ukraine hostage vis-à-vis the Russian regulatory system, EU is wrong. I'm saying if. And the same way, if Russia intends to take Ukraine hostage vis-à-vis the EU regulatory system, Russia is wrong. Not just least because of, principles of international relations. So the name of the game inevitably is convergence. At some stage, EU and Eurasian regulations will have to converge.
But as Nouriel pointed out, convergence is a long, long way away.
Well, it's a long, long way away, but this is what US and Asia are doing with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is what EU and US are starting with the Transatlantic Partnership. All this is about regulatory convergence. So that's the name of the game. It's not about regulatory competition. It's about regulatory convergence. It's about regulatory cooperation. And in this game, I strongly believe that Ukraine has a sort of bridging position which it can use, provided of course, none of these two big neighbors has, let's say, intentions of instrumentalizing Ukraine against the other side.
And there is precious little cooperative spirit, to be frank, evident at this very moment. I think you would probably agree, maybe. But anyway, let's take some points. I'll tell you what, we'll take three at once. I know there was one here and there are two over here that I sort of promised with my eyes. So you, sir, with the purple tie first and then the red tie. Purple, yeah, that's you.
Thank you very much. Alexei Garань, Kyivo-Mogilянская академия.
Thank you. Alexei Garань from Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Mr. Glazyev, Ukraine has 2 times joined Russia, and 2 times we were cheated in a very cruel manner. This is the history that taught us. I'm not economist, I'm historian. And now you are saying that customs union is just a customs union without political substructure. But President Putin is talking about Eurasian Union. 2 days ago, he repeated once again this statement, we are one people, a people. There is a book, there is a president. President Kuchma used to write the book which is called Ukraine is not Russia. That was at the beginning of 2000s. Since that time, you could have read this classical book. We are not one people, and you are saying that we are a people, and you force us into customs union. We are afraid of that. You are afraid in vain, actually. It was Russia who was joining Ukraine many times in history. Ukraine has more grounds to be called Russia than the Russian Federation. Everything Russian originated from here, from Ukraine. It's very strange for us to hear that Russia joined Ukraine 2 times. Russia has grown from Ukraine. You, as historian, turned everything topsy-turvy. As regards Eurasian economy,
5 minutes. I'm a little worried. I mean, let's not get too stuck on arguments over history, please. Simply because we've got only 5 minutes left. I promised you in the red tie, sir, then you, and then the lady here, and then I think we may run out of time. But you go, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Anders Åslund from Peterson Institute for International Economics. Very good to see you here again, Sergey, and thank you for coming and explaining the situation so well for us. I would like to ask you, Sergey published a memorandum about measures to be undertaken against Ukraine, including specific people like, for example, Mr. Poroshenko. Sergey said that you were the co-author of that memorandum. Is that correct?
Just on engaging Ukraine into Eurasian integrational process. That is the title of the memorandum.
If we can just have a very simple answer, we would appreciate it.
Господин Аслан сильно преувеличивает мое влияние.
Exaggerating too much my influence. Deputies of State Duma writing memorandums themselves, they're not taking our advice. We know that such a resolution was adopted on behalf of the chairman of Committee on Foreign Affairs of State Duma, but I have not read it because it was adopted when I was on a business trip. As far as I understand, what was the reason for such a resolution of State Duma? The resolution of European Parliament.
We've got to try and keep some discipline here.
Нас Европарламент обвинил Россию в том, что она вмешивается.
European Parliament accused Russia that it is interfering into affairs, and State Duma made its resolution in response.
Yeah, but listen, you know what? It is a fascinating question, but to be fair to everybody who's put their hands up, I want to just get to the other 2 questions I promised before we end the session, and we're so, unfortunately, perilously close to the end of the session. I think the straight answer that Sergey gave, you may accept it or not, is that no, he wasn't involved, and it wasn't... Anyway, listen, we've got to move on because I want a question here, and then a question from the lady, and then I think we're out of time.
Thank you very much, Bogusław Liberalski, Poland, and Deputy to the European Parliament. It was very interesting, this discussion, intergovernmental discussion in Ukraine and Russia. Minister, let me mention, about 16 years ago, we have entered a really free trade agreement with the European Union. Our export 16, 17 years ago was about $15 billion. Today's 11 times higher. So don't worry. This free trade agreement is not to kill your economy. And I'd like to ask Pascal for your comment on two issues. What we got today is kind of the jeopardy and simply sanctions declared by Russia. How Ukraine may protect itself against? And the second, what about dumping? Is it possible for Ukraine, or what is possible? What kind of instrument you would recommend Ukraine to protect itself against dumping in this great global trade? Thank you.
Right. Pascal, just directly deal with those 2 points.
No, again, I'm not speaking anymore for WTO. So don't take my words as a WTO position. My successor is the one who has authority on these issues now. But the reality is that the WTO provides each WTO member, whether Ukraine or Russia or China or US, with a toolbox to address unfair trade practices. So if a country restricts trade coming from another country on grounds which are WTO uncompliant, then you have a full range of anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, going to litigation. So the arsenal is there. Now, provided, of course, this is done by the WTO rules. And this is, again, available to everybody, but half of the disputes in WTO are about the implementation of trade defense like anti-subsidy or anti-dumping duties. So this is regular business of WTO, and the instruments are there.
And will they work? I mean, the point was partly about protecting Ukraine. Will going through the WTO processes work?
Well, it does work. It does work. The WTO dispute settlement is more efficient in terms of implementation and time of disputes than most national systems.
Okay. Now, I'm afraid it's going to be the last one, but Madam, you've been very patient, so give us the last question.
Господин Глазьев, мой вопрос к вам. Во-первых,
Mr. Glazyev, my question is to you. First of all, thank you for raising patriotic moods in Ukraine, because after every incorrect action from your side, number of supporters of European Union association is Ukraine is growing in geometric progression, and your European choice is not the choice just for better sausage or better goods, but it's much larger than that, and thank you for helping us to understand that. You say that Ukrainian officials are not competent, they don't know English, they have not wrote some documents. Have you read the programs of the leading parties of Ukraine? Party of Region, for instance, in their foreign policy is the course for European integration. So now they are implementing the programs that millions of Ukrainian voters voted for. And secondly, please tell me why up to now free trade area between Ukraine and other countries of CIS is not functioning, including relations with Russia. That could serve a good example for others. As regards customs of union skepticism, to convince them that there could be fair economic space between Russia and Ukraine. Probably you have confused me with somebody else and confused Ukraine with some other country. Go out of Livadia Palace, talk to people who live in Simferopol or in Sebastopol. I came from Lugansk recently, I was in Donetsk, in Kharkiv, in Ukraine. I have the impression that you live in a different country. You don't see results of opinion poll. 40% of population has doubts about that. If you are so sure of your position, convince your government to hold referendum. Let us hold referendum together and ask people of Ukraine what choice they prefer. Why should we divide them of their right? Why you deprive members of parliament of right to go to constitutional court in conformity with Ukraine constitution? You have a strange approach that limits Ukraine by boundaries of this hall. I've been born in Ukraine. I know Ukraine which is different. People who are not sitting in Levadia Whitehall, but who are working at factories, at coal mines, connected with Russia with million ties. I'm a person who is the author of agreement on free trade area with Ukraine that became the basis of our multilateral agreement with CIS countries. Free trade area is functioning since 1993 for more than 20 years. You're smiling as if you are living in another planet. We do not take input duties. This is the rule of free trade area. Do you know what free trade area is? That input duties are not charged. For 20 years, such free trade area is functioning, and we intend to preserve it. The problem is that Ukraine does not value such leadership of Ukraine in particular. They do not value the agreements that had been signed. Because before signing an agreement on association with European Union, you should have took the advice of your partners according to rules of our agreement. And we could have found good decision prompted by Pascal Lamy.
Some very challenging and different perspectives in this debate. And I think, if nothing else, it certainly lived up to that billing. I wish we could continue. I know there's some very strong feeling in the audience, and there's some strong feeling on the panel too. And I sense it and I feel it, but unfortunately, just the way these things work, I have to draw a close to this panel because we've got to prepare for the next one, which is going to be in just 10 or 15 minutes' time. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been, I think you'd agree, a fascinating debate. Thank you all very much indeed.